Okay, thank you all for attending the second round of the 2015 JDC West debate competition. At this point, we wish to remind all of those in attendance that attendance participation in this debate is prohibited. Leg support is permitted in the parliamentary form of tapping on the tables. The recommended form is tapping with the fingers while the rest of the heels of the hand are on the table. We remind spectators to keep the applause respectful so as not to interfere with the speeches. Any spectators deemed to be disruptive will be dealt with accordingly at the discretion of JDC West with no warning given. Please remain seated until the round has concluded and competitors have exited the room. Do not use cell phones or electronic devices at any point during the debate. Time will be kept by the official timekeeper. The start of and end of the protected time, as well as the beginning of the 2-minute rebuttal from the Leader of Opposition, will be indicated by a slap on the table. The end of each speech will be indicated by 2 slaps on the desk with no grace period. A time card will be shown to indicate 30 seconds remaining, and the final 20 seconds will be counted down with the following arm gesture. I will be the Speaker of House and will direct the proceedings. Without further ado, I now call the round to order. This round will feature Team J versus G. J versus G. Okay. Debating for side government. J, G.
No.
J.
Are you side government?
Yeah.
Are you guys? Oh, you're on the wrong side.
That's right.
Okay, so your team J, side government, and your team G, opposition. Good. Now, I now call upon the Prime Minister to open the debate. You're here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, as the government, we need to ask ourselves, what sort of Canada would we like? And what sort of Canada would we like to see in the future? What direction would we like to take? Now, Mr. Speaker, we would like a healthy Canada. What makes a healthy Canada? There are 3 areas of focus that we would like to draw attention to. And they are healthy investments, healthy communities, and a healthy environment. But Mr. Speaker, there is something that is driving a wedge in between these 3 areas of our healthy Canada. And this is that foreign investors are buying up Canadian real estate, and they are projecting and predicting what the future housing market will be like, and then they're immediately implementing these prices. Now, this is causing a lot of issues, and it leads me into the resolution. Be it resolved that this House would ban the purchase of urban, non-new residential real estate by foreign investors. By banning the purchase, we mean preventing the acquirement. By urban, we mean areas within Canadian cities. By non-new residential real estate, we are referring to currently existing housing, including condominiums, apartments, and houses. By foreign investors, we mean non-Canadian buyers that are buying for the purpose of acquiring and not residing. Now, in terms of implementation, from here on out, foreign investors will not be allowed to purchase existing real estate without the intention of living there. This will be implemented within the next year. Please note that it does not prevent foreign buyers from acquiring new real estate and turning new real estate into residential areas. It simply prevents them from buying up currently existing real estate, taking it over, bumping up the price. Our points on side government are that this is not a healthy investment, that it is destructive to communities, and the carbon impact that is created by the raising price of these housing in Canada. In terms of our first point, Mr. Speaker, the reason that this is not a healthy investment is because when the prices escalate to such a high rate, people aren't going to buy it. They can't afford to. And so they either have to move or take out a heavy loan that they can't afford. And let's say that people do buy these houses. Their quality of life is significantly going to go down because they either have to foot the bill and lose commodities elsewhere or somehow keep out taking loans until they're very old. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, if the majority of homeowners in Canada are actually locals, then an increase in price and an increase in investment, doesn't that mean a benefit for Canadian citizens who own those properties as well?
No, this in no way will have any benefit to the Canadian economy. We are not talking about the areas that are already owned by Canadians. That is what we would like to see. We want all current Canadian housing to be kept in Canadian hands. What we want to prevent is the acquirement of this housing in the downtown areas, in the lively areas, in the city hubs. We want to prevent these areas from being taken over by foreign investors in China or Australia or Germany, wherever they're coming from. We want to prevent them from coming in and buying up our real estate, bumping the price up, forcing us to leave our own areas. We want to develop Canada and develop our citizens. We don't want to throw them out on the streets. We're going to do this by keeping real estate in Canadian hands. Because it's not a healthy investment, it's destroying communities because of the carbon impact. Mr. Speaker, this resolution shall stand.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I will now call upon the first member of the opposition, Chief of Police.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, as the opposition, we believe it is the role of the government to continuously build Canada's wealth, and we don't believe this bill does that in any way. Now, before I go into my three arguments, which I will quickly outline, I'll begin my clash. But today, we are going to be discussing why foreign investment is actually beneficial for the Canadian economy. It is beneficial for businesses, for Canadians like you and I. So the three pillars we will be discussing today are the economic benefits that will be reaped by Canadians. The second point that my partner will be talking about is the benefits for small businesses with regards to credit. And the third pillar that we will be closing with is the political precedents and international tension that will arise by the passing of this bill. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have heard a lot from side governments in fear-mongering that this rising price will drive Canadians out of houses, that this investment will be a negative notion for the Canadian economy. Side opposition begs to differ. We'll begin with analysis of their model. We believe their model is not feasible. We believe that there's a difference between Canadian cities, which they have defined as urban, and actual urban areas. In Canadian cities, there's urban and suburban areas, so we don't believe this model is a correct representation of this debate today. Now, Mr. Speaker, they talk about how foreign investment will keep business inside Canada, but how are we able to promote this business and promote this economic growth if we are not allowing residents to come into Canada? Not at this time, thank you. They describe foreign investment as non-Canadian residents who are acquiring land and not residing in it. For the purposes of the debate, we don't believe that this is the correct definition of foreign investment, but we will go along with it for the spirit of the debate. Now, they talk about how a rise in price is going to push out Canadians out of their houses, make it difficult for Canadians to purchase housing in a market that is rising in prices. I'm actually going to talk to you in my first pillar about how this is not true. This is a surface level problem, and when you look beyond that, there's actually great economic benefits for Canadian businesses, for Canadian individuals. Yes, I will take your POI.
Mr. Speaker, how is a housing bubble a surface level problem?
Thank you for your question. I was just going to get to it. So, my first point, which I will talk about the economic benefits reaped by Canadians, including how housing prices rising is actually beneficial. We talk about the principles of a free economy. Canada has a free economy for the reasons of diversification, for the purposes of growth. This is what Canada is based on, and this is why we have a world of opportunities in this country. Now, when you start putting barriers on trade, it is harmful for Canadians and Canadian businesses. Withholding profits within a country does not help the economy itself. It is foreign investment and it is international trade that really benefits our nation. And this is the reason why we have free trade alliances. This is the reason why they work, and we don't believe that restricting international investment is going to help our country in any way. Now, side government, what they've done is they've analyzed this at a surface level. They've seen that when we have these foreign investors come in, there's a rise in demand, so the housing prices rise. Yes, this is true, but yes, this can also be a positive thing. So, side opposition, what we've done is we've gone below the surface area and we've seen what is actually happening, what is the ultimate result for Canadians, and that is what I'll tell you today. This is not a negative notion for Canada. Rising prices is not a negative idea. With rising housing prices, existing Canadian homeowners, and I'll remind you that most Canadians are homeowners in this country, they benefit all across the country with their housing prices, and no, not at this time. They benefit from the rising housing prices, and when they sell their properties, they're reaping in the values of a higher valuation. Additionally, beyond foreign investment, we are encouraging domestic investment. When people know that foreign investors are going to come in and housing prices are going to rise, what are they going to do? They're also going to invest in that same market. They're going to put their money into that market and invest, and they will reap the rewards as well. Additionally, domestic investment is actually going to rise quicker than foreign investment because these are the people that know the properties, they know the areas, and they're going to be contributing to the Canadian market. Now, what does this do for the Canadian dollar? When people are purchasing Canadian goods or they're purchasing Canadian property, they have to trade in Canadian dollars. Now, when there's a higher demand for a Canadian dollar, this makes our dollar go up. So when these foreign investments are coming in, people are buying properties, the value of our dollar goes up, yes?
Mr. Speaker, is side government or side opposition now suggesting that a strong Canadian dollar, which is detrimentally harmful to the Canadian economy, is a good thing?
I'll remind you that Canada is an import-based economy, and most of our business comes from importing, and a strong Canadian dollar actually benefits those who import, and that is the majority of Canada. So, Mr. Speaker, what have I told you today? I've told you how the economic benefits will help Canadians and will reduce barriers to trade. We want to maintain the philosophies of Canada by allowing free trade, and that's what our country is based off of. Additionally, we've talked about how higher housing prices is actually beneficial for the Canadian economy and how these Canadian people are able to reap in the benefits whether they're existing homeowners or not. We have also talked about how when people are purchasing Canadian property, this raises our Canadian dollar, which benefits our import-based economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've clarified our economic benefits, and my colleague Paul will go on to talk about how this benefits small businesses with regards to credit loans. It will also talk about how passing this bill will set a negative political precedent and tension in international relations. Now, Mr. Speaker, as opposition, we beg for Canada to maintain a free trade system, and we believe that diversification, allowing for free trade and allowing for opportunity within this country is the way for Canada to remain a strong economic competitor. And for this reason, this bill must absolutely fall.
I now call upon the first member of government to the podium.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Initially, I was planning on approaching this podium and refuting some of the well-intentioned but sadly misguided points raised by side opposition, but unfortunately I have an additional task today in that I have to collect some of the actual factual inaccuracies that they presented as part of their argument. For example, Mr. Speaker, we are not an import-based economy. The biggest portion of our economy is based on raw material exports, oil, timber, all of these things. So to say that the way they view the economy is by incorporating a logical fallacy into how they understand, factual inaccuracy into how they understand how our economy works, is mind-boggling at this point. Now, Mr. Speaker, the other thing I would like to address is that this notion that housing bubbles and the rising price of real estate is somehow good for Canada. That's not the case, Mr. Speaker. When the price of something is fueled by market speculation on a scarce resource, that's not actually raising the price in a beneficial manner. You're trading something, you're speculating on something, you're not actually creating any value. There's no stability to this, and eventually it comes crashing down. And I'm sure they'll explain how that's going to work.
Which one?
Either.
Okay, so if you look at the basic principles of microeconomics where you see like preferences and tastes and also outcomes actually affecting the market, can you explain how like people knowing that the market actually will go up, like that won't lead to more investment? Can you prove that?
Mr. Speaker, this is the point they're not grasping, that a bunch of people buying something and turning something into a scarce resource without actually changing that resource, without actually building, in this case real estate, without actually building a community around that resource, without actually developing it and adding value, you're just arbitrarily changing the price of that thing. You're creating a bubble. We've seen it in the United States. We've seen it with other markets, with the internet bubble. This is a problem, sure.
Mr. Speaker, would you not agree that in the example of the United States, it was more the credit option and the loose financial credibility of second-hand credits that created the bubble?
No, but the basic problem is the same. This is the last point I'm going to make to explain basic economics to my honorable opponent here. But when you create something, when you raise the price on something, when you create a run on it, don't add any value, you're not doing a good thing. It's a basic concept. Now, Mr. Speaker, the other point I'd like to finally refute on the side of opposition's slate is that the majority of Canadians are homeowners, and they benefit from the rising value of their homes. But yes, Mr. Speaker, but at the same time, if you're a new entrant to the market, you have a harder time buying a home. The thing that you're trying to buy is more expensive, despite the fact that the home hasn't changed. Furthermore, Canada has an incredible consumer debt crisis, not right now, an incredible consumer debt crisis, and the big portion of that is housing debt. If this is the approach that side opposition is taking to governing our nation, we have a serious problem on our hands. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to begin with side government's 3 constructive points. Number 1, my partner spoke to the fact that this is not a healthy investment, real estate speculation is not healthy, and that it's controlling a scarce resource without actually adding any value to it. By controlling this investment, you're not adding to that community. You're buying something and holding it so that you can sell it when the price goes up. And Mr. Speaker, that's all well and fine when you're talking about stocks. It's all well and good when you're playing casino games. But Mr. Speaker, housing is a necessity of life for Canadians. We should not be playing this essential resource like a stock. Not right now, thank you. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to speak to the notion of community health. Now, when someone buys a piece of real estate and lives there, they build a life there. They live in that community. They add to that community. We have an opportunity here to encourage entrepreneurship. We have an opportunity to have people living in these communities, in these urban communities, which often have social issues. They often have tremendous problems. Crime, social problems, poverty. By getting people living there, by getting people to develop unique solutions to these problems, that is how we build a healthy community. That is what we encourage, Mr. Speaker. By creating these ghost condominiums, by creating these urban dwellings, not right now, thank you. By creating these urban areas where people invest in the real estate and hold it, and don't add anything to that community, we're forcing people out. The rising prices force people to either live elsewhere, or more often what we're seeing, Mr. Speaker, is flight to the suburbs. And that's what we're trying to prevent here, Mr. Speaker. The suburbs have evolved in recent times because cities have a classic dilemma. Do they build up or do they build out? With foreign investment, with this increase in holding investment in urban centers, we see that it becomes cheaper to move to the suburbs and commute in. Which leads into my third point, Mr. Speaker. We rob these communities of healthy residents and force them outside. We force them into the suburbs where they have to commute more. They have longer commutes, they spend more time in their car, which not only makes you physically unhealthy because the human body simply wasn't designed to sit in a driver's seat for 2 hours of a 24-hour day, we see a huge impact in carbon emissions from all these commuters. Mr. Speaker, we need people living in these communities. We build healthy communities around residents taking up these urban centers, solving the problems around them, developing an attachment. We don't see this by robbing people who have grown up in an area, who have embraced the way of community, embraced the area around them. By forcing them out, by rising real estate prices, we don't add to the health of that community, Mr. Speaker. We're slowly killing communities and creating suburbs. We're creating greater carbon emissions. We're creating a tremendous problem. Mr. Speaker, my colleague spoke to the type of Canada we want to create. We want to create a Canada full of healthy communities, where we have affordable urban housing, effective public transit that people can make use of, and we encourage people to innovate, to adapt, to develop unique solutions for the problems around them. And side opposition does not grasp that, Mr. Speaker. To use an old, cheesy adage to close my speech, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to state the following. You can build a house, you can buy a house, or in this case, it's referring to urban dwellings, we're talking about apartments and condominiums. But you can build a condominium, you can buy an apartment, but you cannot build a home, Mr. Speaker. And lastly, for these three key contentions, that we're not creating healthy investment by tolerating this, that we're not creating healthy communities by tolerating this, and lastly, we're raising our carbon footprint. This resolution must and shall stand.
Member of Government, I now call upon the second member of opposition to the podium. Whenever you are ready.
Just whenever?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Side government has told you today, what kind of Canada do we want to build? And with their resolution, with their model that they're proposing, which really doesn't really make sense for this debate, all their definitions they've given so far, the Canada they want to build is one that lacks foreign investment, that lacks foreign culture, and actually doesn't diversify and harms Canada. If side government can prove to us why the status quo doesn't work, maybe they can win, but so far they haven't proved anything, and we beg for them to do so in their next speech. So before I go into the two final pillars on side opposition, which is the idea of how it affects, how this resolution actually negatively affects small businesses, and why we actually need, why we oppose this resolution. And then the third point being about the political ties and the negative political precedent you send to foreign nations, I'm going to clash with everything that you've heard from side government today. So, side government's contention against side opposition's case so far has been about one statement that my colleague Sarah brought up in her speech, where she said we're an importing country. So if they want to debate semantics, let's go into their model and let's go into their definitions. Because so far, we've already agreed that their definitions don't really make sense for the scope of this debate. They define urban to suburban and every area within a Canadian city. We don't think that's a fair definition. If they really want to argue just words and like semantics, then we don't think that's really the point of this debate. We think the point of this debate is talking about, does this negatively affect Canada or does it positively affect Canada? And we think side opposition has proved to you today that with their model, there are no benefits. It's actually just negative harm. And I'm going to do furthermore and clash with everything that they presented for you today. So let's go about their first point. So they presented you this really nice case, and they gave you a really nice title, like healthy investments, healthy community, healthy environment. So let's go into the first one. They talked about healthy investments. They talked about, oh, we need really healthy investments to grow our nation. Mr. Speaker, how are no investments from foreign nations actually healthy? We don't believe this is fair. We don't believe that actually like disregarding and not allowing for other people to invest within our country so that they can have their own personal agenda as well as benefit our economy. We don't think that's healthy at all. We think that other people in a free trade market, in a free trade world, should be given the opportunity to operate on their own means and to actually get what they want. I think that's what our Canada supports and that's what our world supports. So thank you. So they talked about this whole idea of like, they fearmongered a lot within both of their speeches so far. They talked about, oh, people will be kicked out of their homes, etc. My colleague already clashed with this, but Mr. Speaker, people will be, the high value property doesn't always equate to high rent, and we don't think like all this fearmongering from side government actually makes sense. So the second point they brought up is talk about community health. And then they talked about, oh, you know what? This resolution actually promotes entrepreneurship and for people to fix social problems rather than having a ghost, like a ghost condo or a ghost house. Mr. Speaker, they're assuming lots of things on that point. Firstly, they're assuming that one local can fix socioeconomic points that exist in a community. We think that's deep-rooted. We don't think one individual owning one house in that community can actually make it a vibrant place. We don't think that exists. We think even if the cities work towards better communities, even that doesn't work. We don't really understand this assumption. I'll take you in a second. The second assumption they're basically making is that maybe these people that are investing in these foreign houses won't actually allow for their houses to be rented. We don't think any of their assumptions actually make sense. Sure, I'll take it.
Mr. Speaker, this is exactly our point. One individual in one home cannot build a community, and this is why we cannot allow the foreigners to come in and take over.
Okay, so thank you. What we think actually benefits people, what we think that actually needs to happen in culture and a society is diversification, and for people to actually be able to do what they want. If they try to say that the side government is trying to promote like people being able to do what they want to fix problems, we think that side government has sort of skewed this debate so far. What side opposition is standing for is allowing for people to invest in their own interests as well as try to benefit people. We think that if people want to benefit that community, they can rent their houses out. We don't think like side government really understands the scope of this debate, and so far they've mischaracterized and misguided their entire arguments towards this debate. The third point on side government is this talk about unhealthy environment. So their entire case so far has ran under a lot of assumptions, and there's another one here. So basically what they're talking about is urban sprawl. So they're saying, you know what, people are going to move to suburban areas because it's like less cost. So they're going to drive into the city to work downtown. We don't really understand this because their model says people that won't reside in those places. And then they said, you know what, if they reside in those places, they'll drive into downtown. Therefore, it causes a carbon footprint. We don't really understand where side government's getting this like analysis from. And if they want to like clear up the case contention within their arguments, they can do so.
Point of information.
No, thank you. So let's go into what side opposition has presented to you today. So what we are going to talk about. So the idea that we want to talk about on side opposition is the idea of the benefits of small businesses as well as how it's affecting political ties. So the first point about small businesses is that in most small businesses, they started on a credit. So they maintain credit by leveraging on equity, mostly homeowner equity, right? So it helps foster small business because it includes the high home prices, and high home prices don't necessarily equate to high rent also. And when rent has to be kept up more or less with wages and inflation, so we didn't really understand like side governments clash. And the thing is, property is one thing that doesn't really fluctuate with volume and inflation. We think like property usually stays pretty steady, and that's why we think property is something that people should be allowed the opportunity to invest in. The third point on side opposition is the idea of affecting political ties. So let's talk about Canada as a foreign player, as a global player, because we are a leader in the global market. So what happens when what you say is, you know what, we want to retain all of our property, all of our investment within our country. What do you do when you cut off foreign investment and don't allow for people to invest within your own country? What that does is it sets a negative image to everyone in the world that you're not someone that wants to that believes in free trade, that allows for people to invest and to be interested in other things, to diversify. And that sets a negative political precedent to everyone in the world that Canada isn't opening up its borders for anyone. And that's not an image that should be projected to any nation, to anyone in the world. And that is why this resolution doesn't really work. So promoting protectionism is sort of an ideal that we saw a long time ago. We see the reason why protectionism doesn't actually work, the reason why free trade is actually benefited, is because people should be given the opportunity to actually invest. So what has side opposition told you today? So side opposition has proved to you why the status quo is actually beneficial. It's proved to you on a macro and micro level why these benefits help Canadian citizens as well as the political aspect and the global sphere. And we've talked about how it affects everyone on a small and large scale. And what we've done is we've clashed with everything side government has brought up. So if they want to do so, maybe they can build the case next time. Thank you.
Member of the opposition, I now call the second member of government to the podium.
Mr. Speaker, my role today is rather frustrating. I need to really show you what this debate truly comes down to. I need to do a full refutation of the few things that side opposition said, and then I need to rebuild a case that still stands strong, Mr. Speaker. So with that, we're going to go into this first idea. We find it incredibly frustrating that side opposition decided to attack a completely legitimate implementation plan simply because their points wouldn't stand otherwise. And we're going to take a look at that in a little bit more depth. We're sorry that they don't agree with certain functionalities and certain schematics of the actual definition. However, the purpose of this debate still stands strong and still stands fairly. And we're going to prove that to you as I go through this point-by-point refutation of side opposition. Now let's start off with this first idea of restricting international trade. Mr. Speaker, to fully understand international trade, we need to understand that there are multiple different components of international trade. International trade is not solely the housing market. It is not solely an exportation business, an importation business, as they like to call it, schematics. But Mr. Speaker, this type of international trade encompasses everything. It encompasses everything that a country does. So for them to stand forth and say that if we restrict one certain type of trade, that the entire world is now going to boycott us, is absolutely preposterous, and ironically, they called us scaremongering. Now, let's go into the second idea, the idea of investment. And Mr. Speaker, this was actually a good point, and if we take a look at this and analyze it, it's interesting, but unfortunately not particularly relevant, because Canada does encourage investments. We encourage investments in small businesses. We encourage investments in entrepreneurial activities, in large businesses. However, what we shouldn't stand for is investment for profit on the availability of housing for Canadians to live in, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that our housing market should be a game for other people to come in, increase prices, increase rent, buy out condominiums, buy out apartments, and then turn a quick profit at the detriment of Canadian citizens. And that's because, Mr. Speaker, what we see occurring is that these international investors don't have a direct hand or a direct impact on the Canadian communities. And that's something that the Canadians do have. We're directly impacted, influenced, and we live in our communities. And that's something that we should be keeping for Canadian investors. Because the foreign investors will be driving up prices. We've seen it happen in Toronto. We've seen it happen in Vancouver. We've seen it happen in the Maritimes in Ottawa. We've seen it happen in Los Angeles. And we're going to talk a little bit about Brisbane later on, because that's a perfect model of what they want to see happening here. But more on that later. Now, they also seem to completely disregard the idea of apartments and condominiums, and they really honed in on houses and how I could rent out my house if I want to, and that's fantastic, Mr. Speaker, but if I live in an apartment complex and a foreign investor comes in, purchases it, and then hikes up the rent price for me, that's a direct impact on myself. I can no longer afford to live there, and that forces me to move elsewhere. And that's part of the reason that we've seen Toronto expand so exponentially and so fast to the point where it's now referred to as the Greater Toronto Area, because the entire Toronto core, or the entire city of Toronto for that matter, is so incredibly expensive in their housing that very few people can actually afford to live there. Many young students, many young citizens, many young families that want to buy their first home simply can't afford to do so in the downtown area, and they're forced to move elsewhere. And now let's go overseas. Let's take a look at Brisbane, Australia, Mr. Speaker. The exact same thing was happening there. Australia is a very foreign-invested market. It's one of the most popular markets for foreign investors to buy into because it's such a hot commodity as a country. It's such a popular retreat area. It's such a beautiful country. And so these foreign investors were buying up the areas, particularly in Brisbane, incredibly close to the Sunshine Coast and Surfers Paradise. And what ended up happening, Mr. Speaker, was that the core of Brisbane, or the entire Brisbane area, became so expensive that large communities became ghost towns. They have empty buildings that are degrading. They have buildings that nobody's able to afford to move into because these foreign investors hiked up the prices as they saw fit, because they saw this was an in-demand area, somewhere that people wanted to move into. So they increased all the prices, and they drove up the housing market to the point where Brisbane, much like Toronto, had to become the Greater Brisbane area. And people can't afford to live in the core anymore, Mr. Speaker. And we don't want that happening to any more Canadian cities. We already see 4 of our major cities heading in that direction, and we don't want the other ones to follow suit, because that's incredibly dangerous for Canada as a country. Now, let's just ignore this whole import-export-based economy, because we have NAFTA, we have the WTO, we have EU trades. We are not an import-based economy, Mr. Speaker, and if we want to get into those details, that's actually not a detail. That's a fundamental crux in their argument today. And I'm not even going to address that because there's so much more to talk about. They also talked about having a stronger housing market is a good thing, and that a strong dollar is good for Canada. Mr. Speaker, that's just fundamentally wrong, and if we don't understand that today in today's debate, we need to go back to school. But what we need to take a look at here is that a stronger housing market is beneficial, but only to a limit, Mr. Speaker. There's a limit to which it's beneficial. When we have a basic house costing $2.2 million, that's no longer a beneficial housing market. That's a danger, and that's a detriment to the Canadian citizens and to the Canadian economy. And if SAD opposition can afford to buy a $2.2 million house, that's fantastic, but I'm gonna have to move elsewhere, as I'm sure many of us will. Houses are not like taxi medallions. They're not something that get traded from place to place. They're something that's purchased, acquired, and many of us can't even turn a profit on them with the accelerated rate that the housing market is increasing today, especially if we look at these major cities. If we take a look at the rate at which these cities are expanding, it's because people can't afford to live in the cores, the areas that people want to live in. We're losing out on communities, we're losing out on opportunities, and we're no longer seeing this healthy Canada that we once had. We're seeing this Canada that's becoming so sprawled, so expensive, so unable to live in, that we simply can't. And SAD opposition brought up this last idea of political ties, and how we're going to sever political ties, but Mr. Speaker, we're doing the opposite. We're not limiting trade in a multitude of different ways. We're not limiting trade at all. We're just saying that the housing market is not something to be gambled with. And we're doing this so that immigrants and Canadians alike can afford to live in the cities that we are cultivating, that we are thriving, and the communities that we want to see last. So, Mr. Speaker, it's for the reasons that we've brought forth, the idea of healthy investments versus unhealthy investments, community health, and the entire carbon point that was brought forward, that this resolution before the House today is so crucial at this point. This resolution before the House today is so important to understand the actual fundamentals of what it's truly about, Mr. Speaker. And it's for these reasons that we've brought forth that the resolution before the House today must, and most indubitably, will stand. Thank you.
Second member of government, I have called Leader of Opposition for the 5-minute speech, followed by their 2-minute rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, before I delve into a summary of our case, I would like to first outline some of the contentions that we have against their case, some of the clash that we have. And then I'm going to summarize what they've said, what we've said, and what this debate has really come down to with the major themes of the debate. So first, they've talked a lot about, there are 3 points where healthy investments, healthy communities, and healthy environment. And even within these points, they have a lot of case tension. So what do I mean by that? The resolution talks about specifically banning foreigners from buying existing houses, but it does not ban foreigners from buying new houses. Now, they talked a lot about how they want to keep people within the core of the cities. They don't want urban sprawl, basically. They talked about the dangers of people moving to the suburbs. However, if foreign investors are not banned from buying new houses, what that means is that they'll just pay for companies to build them new houses in the suburbs, creating urban sprawl, continuing, I'll take you in a moment, continuing to increase the carbon footprint. So if this government was truly about saving the environment, what they would do is they would allow foreign investment to buy old houses within the core so that population density will continue to be high. But somehow they do not see this point. Would you not agree?
Mr. Speaker, does side opposition grasp the concept that by allowing foreigners to build new houses and new developments, they're creating jobs and trapping value?
This is something that we already see that foreign investors are also doing. They buy old houses where the value is on the land, not the building itself. What they do is they take this old house and they build a condominium on it, therefore increasing population density within the core and also increasing the value of the building and the land that it stands on. Therefore, it is creating jobs. It is creating more economic surpluses, and that eventually is good for Canada and for Canadians. Now, we've also talked a lot about how they assume that the condos won't be rented. They talk a lot about these ghost cities that suddenly sprout up from nowhere. However, they also talk about how we don't know basic economics. However, if you remember the supply and demand curves, if there is a lot of supply but no demand because these cities are, in a second, these cities are now ghost towns. If there's no demand, then nobody will buy those houses in the first place. Therefore, nobody's making money. This is simply something that we don't even see in reality. This is simply something that they see in their own fantasy world.
So are you potentially saying that what occurred in Brisbane and Cairns, what's happening in Toronto, is actually beneficial to the cities?
Well, we're not saying that it was beneficial. We're saying that it's not actually happening within Canada. We don't actually see this happening within our own communities. Not right now, thank you. What we also talked a lot about, they talked specifically about restricting foreigners from investing in Canada. However, may I remind this government that the majority of Canada is multicultural, and that we are a multicultural country, and that many of these foreign investors might actually eventually become Canadian citizens and spend their fortunes, so they say, within Canada. They will invest in Canadian real estate, they will invest in Canadian real estate development, not right now, thank you, and eventually this will benefit Canadians. We also talked a lot about the benefit to existing Canadian homeowners, which they conceded that the majority of Canadians are homeowners and the majority of homes are Canadian owned. They conceded to that point. And therefore, by creating more equity, by increasing the prices of these houses, more equity is being built. Not right now, thank you. And therefore, that will help retirees, that will help people that currently own homes, and eventually it helps Canada as a whole. It also encourages domestic investment, as my partners pointed out, because there is a strong market in the housing market. If Canadians know that the prices are going to go up, they will invest in their own Canadian domestic market. This is simple economics. We also talk a lot about how most small businesses are started on credit. Now, most small businesses comprise of families that start up their own business within real estate or restaurants or the service industry. And these businesses are typically leveraged by using homeowners' equity. So the rising prices will in fact foster small business. And small business, may I remind you, creates the majority of our GDP. They do create over half of our GDP. And in fact, most Canadians are benefited from small businesses. So by rising home prices, you rise homeowners' equity, and therefore they have better credit to start new businesses, which employ more people. They also talked a lot about, what we said was that Canada was a net import nation, and that is a fact. The fact that we make a lot of money off exports is another deal. That is our major industries. But as a whole, we are an import nation, net import nation. And so they talked a lot about how a strong Canadian dollar is not necessarily the best for the economy. However, if we do export, and if our main industries are in exports, then that does in fact benefit Canadians, as we stated previously. So overall, we've talked a lot about the benefit to existing Canadian homeowners, the benefit to Canadian small businesses, and the benefit to the economy as a whole. What they've talked a lot about is about their case tension, how they don't want urban sprawl, however this proposition would in fact increase urban sprawl. They talk a lot about the semantics of economics, and they got most of these facts wrong. We talked a lot about how a strong Canadian dollar is good for exporters. We talked a lot about how Canada is a multicultural country, and that needs to be fostered. So eventually, because of all of these, this case tension that they have, and the fact that we brought you actual facts, actual analysis of this proposition, we definitely believe that this proposition must definitely fall. And with all of that, I will now leave you to the last speech, which we hope will be a good one. Thank you.
Now I call the Prime Minister for the speech of rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's take a step back. Let's look at the big picture of this debate. In Canada, we have communities that we want to develop and that we want to prosper. And Side opposition doesn't see the value of these communities. Now, how do we grow these communities? We grow them through healthy investment, and there's plenty of it. We have exports, we still have imports, we can still import goods. The only thing that we are not allowing is that foreign companies buy old real estate. If they want to set up new communities that are super expensive on the outskirts, that's fine. People probably won't buy them. They will stay in the less expensive Canadian-owned downtown areas, and the populous areas. Also, we still have other markets, and we still have our political ties through these markets. Now, when should the government intervene, Mr. Speaker? Free trade is great, but there is a market inefficiency. We are seeing the uprooting of Canadian communities. When foreign investors choose to bump up these prices ridiculously high in order to just turn a high profit and cut their losses, it does force us out, and it uproots and destroys our communities. And this is not what we want to see. This is not healthy investment. We want to grow our communities, not the dollar amount of our homes. And in terms of diversity, we are very welcome to immigration and having lived in these homes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, side government. Thank you, side opposition. For your arguments, I now call this round to a close. I remind the audience to please remain seated until all the competitors have exited, and refrain from speaking about the round until well clear day. I now invite the two teams to begin.
You're gonna watch it?